you will see more money come into cannabis than has ever come into a vertical market in the history of primates, ever.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields. With me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we've got a very special guest, Seth Yakatan. Seth, thanks for taking the time. How you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me, Brian and Kellen. I don't know how special I am. I can't believe anybody wants to listen to the crap that comes out of my mouth, but appreciate the platform. Thanks for having me.
I love it. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Really excited to talk to Seth. Grateful that I have another West Coaster on here to kind of help educate the masses. How are you doing, Brian?
Yes, that's right. And Seth, we do have a East Coast, West Coast battle. And as Kellen alluded to, we have to put you on the map. So if you had to choose an allegiance, maybe if you had to choose a coast to help educate more, which one would you choose?
I'm West Side for life, cuz. I mean, let's be real. I got a lot of love for Biggie, but I was rocking NWA before anyone even knew what NWA was. So let's just be real. The heart of rap is in South Central Los Angeles, and I don't care what the fuck you're gonna say. All props to KRS-One, all props to Brooklyn, Bedford Stuyvesant, but the West is where it's at. Let's be honest.
I think there's a lot of people right now that might have just stopped the podcast based on some of those comments. But
it's okay. It's all good. It's all good. You know what? Let the haters hate. I'm just going to bask here in the sun. That's all.
Amen.
I love it. So, Seth, for our
haters
listeners,
gonna hate.
For our listeners unfamiliar about you, can you give a little background about yourself and how you got into the cannabis space?
Yeah, I'm really a suit. I'm a dumb corporate finance guy. My stylist makes me look really cool. I started off as what you would consider to be an institutional investor. So I did about 16 years on the buy side. I was in a venture capital fund for about 4. I went back to school, got an MBA in finance and statistics, and worked in an M&A firm while I was there. And then I went to work for a bank. And inside the bank, there was a $5 billion fund that we invested in essentially leverage buyouts for private equity companies and telecom media companies. So I did that for a long time. So I really understand how to put money into a company at an early stage, get out of it or kill it, and then how to take something that's very large and scale it and do a roll up with it. And my dad grew up in an orphanage, and he became a very successful entrepreneur in the life sciences business. So in 2001, I started a consulting practice with him focused on mainly therapeutic drug development companies. Fast forward to 2012, I founded what I guess was the second or the third therapeutic drug development company trying to take cannabis or a small molecule that modulated the endocannabinoid system and get it through the FDA. I raised that company a bunch of money and took it public, got involved in a few more. And somehow at the end of 2019, I kept slamming into this planet called ease. And from 2019 until the middle of 2022, I worked at ease as a consultant doing corporate advisory, M&A, capital markets. I helped ease raise $130 million, and I merged it with Green Dragon. And that was really my entree and my playoff win in cannabis. So that's how I got in. And I'll stop there.
I know one of your focuses as an advisor is to help these companies that are looking to grow some capital and to expand their business. And hopefully the anticipation as the industry kind of opens up and the checkbooks start to continue to come, are there certain aspects of businesses that investors are looking for, certain credentials or criteria that make these businesses more attractive to investors, in your opinion?
There are. I started really looking at cannabis because when I was in biotech, I was so tired of constantly having to raise money for these companies because they don't sell any products. So I said, gosh, there must be an easier way to do this. And in cannabis, it's even harder. So like part of the problem that exists in cannabis, and I think I did a post on this, is that the biotech universe of investors is like, call it 1,100, and the cannabis universe of investors is maybe like 100. So the first thing is that you have to understand it's really hard to get money into a cannabis company in general because there's just not the number of people that you can go to for any other company in any other industry. Doesn't matter. What I do think is that there's three or four things that seem to either really be difficult or really work. If you have something which is completely new and you have never done it before and you do not generate revenue with it, it's really hard. So I think startup in cannabis automatically is harder than any other industry that you're going to go after just because of the limited number of partners you can get. What seems to have worked in funding cannabis companies is, do you have a physical asset? So most of the initial money that flowed into cannabis was some type of real estate securitized loan or real estate backed collateralized piece of paper. So if you have something which is a physical asset that you can own or buy or leverage, your buy-in stakes become easier. Depending upon the investor, I think they all look at different kinds of things. There's, in my opinion, 6 or 7 models that what I say are function, meaning that they have the capacity to generate positive net operating income before interest and taxes. Of those 5 or 6 models, there's some of them that have the ability to generate actual real cash flow. And I think what you're seeing now is the more established companies that I would say are kind of greater than 10 million in revenue have a much easier ability to raise money because they've either proven their model or they seem more viable than things that don't. So are there specific things that people look for? I think it just depends on the investor, but that's the way that I tend to see the landscape.
Right now, a lot of investors got into cannabis. I think like maybe 2018, there's a big rush with the Farm Bill, right? But traditionally, when say a VC firm or an institutional investor gets into a private company, one of the exit strategies is taking that company public. And we haven't really seen a ton of private cannabis entities go public recently. Do you think that's going to change? And when that does change, do you think that is a catalyst for increasing more investing and increasing that pool of investors that you were just talking about?
I think that's a component of it. One thing that I didn't touch on previously is that most of the companies that I was involved with before I got involved in cannabis are what are called micro cap, meaning that they're less than $500 million of market capitalization. And most of them are either on the NASDAQ, the AMEX, or the bulletin board. So my bread and butter for 10 or 15 years was those kinds of companies. Most of those companies have had to list, most every cannabis company has had to list on a junior exchange or has had to reverse into a vehicle that gets them access to capital largely through the Canadian public equity markets. The Canadian public equity market is a robust but immature and inefficient market. So even if the public window reopens, you tend to find the Canadian access to capital kind of go like this, right? Like it's an upside down V. You have a lot of money there and then it kind of goes away. And that's what you saw in cannabis because the returns just don't match the hype unless you're able to get out. Where I think you have a catalyzing change is when you are able to access public equity capital in the US capital markets on NASDAQ or AMEX. I don't know if that is a Schedule 3 item. I don't know if that's a full federal legalization item. But once you do that, and again, I use this terminology a lot, it's the reason I'm in cannabis. You will see more money come into cannabis than has ever come into a vertical market in the history of primates. Ever. Ever. Because if you think about it, and I think I've discussed it in some of my posts, the relative amount of capital that cannot invest in cannabis is the most capital that's available anywhere in the world, which is the US public equity and private equity markets. Once that mechanism is unlocked, cannabis becomes tulip bulbs and the most action in any industry that's ever been seen, as far as what I think. I'll tell you why. 20 companies make about 70% of the goods that we all consume. Cannabis is just fighting for wallet share for alcohol, tobacco, wellness, CPG, and pharmaceutical. As soon as those 5 verticals, and what do those 5 verticals do? Those 5 verticals need constant growth and they buy stuff that they don't know how to do well. You're going to see that in cannabis. because when you look at the consumer share of wallet for cannabis versus any of those five verticals, it's, if not as robust, more robust. So as soon as you open up that strategic capital, and when Procter and Gamble and alcohol and tobacco companies come in, you're going to see so much money show up. It's going to make 2016 look like, you know, seventh grade Little League baseball. I'm going to be very clear. That's why I'm in cannabis, because when that moment happens, I'm on the field.
That is why I wanted to get your take specifically on, as an advisor, on where you think companies can separate from themselves, because I totally understand today the hard assets with the real estate, but branding and operational efficiency, some of those aspects are going to be attractive for certain players. So I think for some of the builders out there, specifically the entrepreneurs that maybe have like a beverage brand or let's say an edibles brand that are looking to position themselves today as an attractive partner for investors, but also more of a forward-focusing approach. That's why I want to understand specifically, are there criteria that you think growth at certain costs, maybe profitability, that make a differentiator when the tides start to come down?
I do. I firmly believe that there are 6 business models in cannabis which function under the criteria of generating cash flow or profit. Sorry, this happens to me. I don't know how to make it stop. So we'll go through the whole thing. Hold on, wait, it gets better. Hold on, it gets better. I love you so much.
Thought it was just my screen.
Nope. Let's just look at maybe 2 or 3 models. So cultivation, if you're not stupid about it, seems to work, right? Whether you buy the land or whether you lease the land, depending upon where you're at, and I could whiteboard you, but if you build a 400 to 600 lighter, or you build a, pod of 4 rooms that are equivalent to 400 to 600 lighters, and you grow good indoor and you keep your costs down and you can sell that for 16 to 2,000 a pound, that's going to cash flow. You don't need 25,000 lights, right? So, cultivation in and of itself, when it's done correctly, even at scale, is something which I have seen be profitable. There's plenty of people who have cultivation plus a brand. That seems to be profitable too. So those are 2 models that I look at that I think are interesting from the standpoint that they're profitable. For me, the delineation is profit's always going to win. Let's look at another model that I think is really interesting that I've espoused a lot, which is the inverse asset light brand. So we're going to make an edible or a vape, and instead of creating a physical asset somewhere, we're going to MSA a space, and we're going to reduce our CapEx, and we're going to come in and put in our SOPs and put in our sales force. And because we have really amazing quality and we have a killer product, we're going to rip. And probably because we understand how to sell to our customers, which are really the MSOs in certain states. So I've articulated 2 companies which I think are masters of this in Timeless and Grown Edibles, right? I think those are going to be 2 really important companies because their products are amazing. The companies are super profitable. They haven't really taken any outside money. They're founder controlled. And they know who their customer is, which is basically the 6 or 7 people who distribute those products for them in those states at retail. Let's look at an 800-pound gorilla. And I did a post on them a couple of weeks ago, in Kiva. Putting KSS on the side for a minute, because everyone has that uncle that they don't want to show up at the wedding. Putting KSS on the side for a second. That's a beast. That's absolutely a beast. Whether it's public or not, they have a significant amount of very sophisticated non-cannabis private equity in the company. They have dominated the states that they're in. They've been super strategic about where they've gone. They're real cannabis OGs. They're multi-state. They probably have the number 1 or number 2 position in all of their SKUs in every state that they're in. And if I'm going to bet on somebody who has the bandwidth, the capital, the reach, and the product set to be a platform to go roll a bunch of stuff up into, it's probably them. So, you have a couple of things which I think work. They're all scale, right? They're all scale or scaling. And I think for me, if I, talk to people about what do investors look for, it's how do I get more money into those companies? That's where I think the action is. Because again, If I go back to the last thing that I talked about, which is like, what's P&G going to do? Like P&G is going to say, oh, where's $100 million of revenue at retail with a killer product and an amazing team that's cool, and I can't do it on my own. Oh, let's go find 6 of those and just buy it. That's where I think it goes.
So how is the balance, the jockey and the horse work? Because as you were alluding, it's very complicated, and understanding the dynamics given how an operator who's experienced and who's kind of been through the tough times of cannabis OG, exactly like you described, but also has the foresight to position the team and the infrastructure to be able to ride the waves going forward, but also set them up for long-term success.
The first thing that I kind of have to look at is it a single decision maker or is it a team? So if it's a single decision maker, how strong is that single decision maker? And if it's not, how good is the team? I think the one thing that I would say permeates most of what I think are good companies are that if it is one person that owns it, they've figured out how to surround themselves and empower a really strong team to get it over the line. And every company that I've talked about publicly and, promoted, I think has got an amazing single founder or decision maker and a great team. And that's a big differentiator. Sometimes you can have a great team and it doesn't work. So it's not always just the team, but I think in my practice, what I like to say to people is I need mind share of one of the decision makers or of the decision makers for me to be effective. So what do I mean by that? There's a company that I advise, got 2 term sheets from an investor last night. Who'd they call at 10:30 on Tuesday? Me. Because if you ain't calling me or texting me at 10:30 on Tuesday, I ain't got mind share. And if I don't have mind share, you're not going to listen to me. And if you're not going to listen to me, then it doesn't fucking matter. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I've just had 500, hours of batting practice. I've got hit in the face by every pitch. So I'm not going to be able to tell you what you should do or why you should do it. But I can tell you, here's what I think is going to happen. And here's the holes that you're going to fall into. And you know what? I've seen this movie 17 times before. And it pretty much ends the same way 17 times. So like, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but here's what I think. And based upon that experience, here's what you need to understand. Ultimately, it's kind of what I like to say is I'm a Sherpa. And, I'm going to take you to the top of Everest if I can. Sometimes I can't. I'm going to take you to the top of Everest. Last 100 yards, you have to walk yourself. I can't do it. You have to do it yourself. But if you don't trust me enough to get you there, it ain't going to work.
How much different has the cannabis industry from an advisor perspective been than kind of your past life is in emerging markets kind of specifically? Do you always see kind of a mixed bag when you're looking at emerging markets, or is cannabis just kind of its own unique cake, if you will?
I ascribe to the Myers-Briggs kind of personality typing. I see a lot of the same personalities. I see a lot of the same personalities as founders and CEOs of early stage companies, regardless of the industry. And if we just classify them into 16 different personality types, there's probably 6 personality types that I know I'm not going to get along with. I don't want to be in the room with, and I don't want to work with. There's probably about 4 personality types that it's okay. And then there's 6 personality types I jive with. So, the eccentric, crazy, founder shows up in almost every industry that I've ever been in. And most of the time, those people are somewhat bipolar or multiple personality disorder or on the spectrum in some way, shape, or form, like the most brilliant ones. And those are the ones that I've ever had, the biggest success or the most failures with. So there's definitely a personality set that you encounter in a lot of these companies from the leadership perspective. And some of them are great and some of them I can't deal with. So it just depends.
Yeah, Kellen, just to allude to it a little bit, I think Sam Altman put it perfectly, is that being an entrepreneur just means just getting hit in the face every single day and having to make hard decisions on repeatedly, because things go wrong inevitably almost every single day. And Seth, I'm assuming that's kind of the direction you're referring to, that as an entrepreneur in any industry, things are extremely hard. Cannabis maybe has additional obstacles, but there's certain personality traits like grit and a relentlessness that are necessary to overcome these constant challenges.
Yeah, every industry has their own challenge. The cannabis industry, you're just kind of making up the rules almost every day as you go along. And depending upon the vertical, it's really hard to make money. And you also have a nefarious aspect to the black market of the business, which is like this invisible hand that no one can quantify. And you have D8, D9 leakage. And then you have the socioeconomic kind of underpinnings of the three of us are having a conversation about weed, and there's 1,000 guys locked in jail for even having the conversation about weed. And then there's social equity, and then there's gender equity, and you have all of these things that, I'm not going to say constrain, but rather you have all these things that bind the industry that may or may not bind pharmaceutical or biotech drug development in the same way. So in that industry, you're just hoping for moonshots, right? You guys remember this robot that I hate fucking robots. I'm so anti-robots and anti-Tesla and forget it. But remember this robot that landed on the moon like a month ago and it like fell over? I was laughing so hard because it's kind of like, well, okay, I guess it's not, like it just anyway.
I felt like
all if we for it to just be on the side.
If we cut to Seth, that's Seth pushing over the robot and laughing about it.
No robots.
Do you look at the cannabis industry when you're evaluating it? Do you look at companies as in like, okay, this is medical pharma company, and I'm going to look at these aspects. This is a recreational cultivation company, and these are kind of the core attributes I'm looking for when I'm analyzing this company. Is it any different, or is it all just cannabis to you at this point?
It's totally different. So, I try and pretend I'm dumb, but I certainly have a quantitative research analyst classical training mentality. So normally the first two questions that I'm going to ask are, what state are you in and what do you do? Because the way that I'm trained is I want to put you in a box. Because if I can put you in a box, I can then comparable you against 15 other people that are in the box and see what your metrics are and see how you perform. So for me, it's kind of the analysis always is, how can I get you in the box? And usually the first two questions that I'm going to ask are, what state or states are you operating in and what do you do? So that way I can quantify you as, are you a cultivator? Are you retail? Are you vertically integrated? And each of those I think have different metrics. So that's how I kind of look at it personally, because what I want to do is I want to compare you to the 7 other things that are doing the same thing as you.
To slightly switch gears, I really want to get your perspective on the California cannabis market. I think the public or most people can assume the industry, and specifically in California, operates one way, but I think your perspective on specific some of the operators who are currently operating under these really challenging conditions, but also thriving, I think that perception should be elaborated on. Can you share some more about that?
California's tough. Your cost of entry here is extremely expensive. Your tax base here is expensive. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. It's the 8th largest economy on the planet standalone. It's the single largest economy for cannabis on the planet standalone. It will be until you two have kids. Ain't going anywhere. So for me, action is right here, and that's where I'm staying for a minute. It's hard, and it's hard for a number of different reasons. I think one of the reasons that it's been hard is that the promise of retail has not translated into the results of retail. You have an amalgamation of retail in concentrated areas where you don't need that much retail. So I think it's suffered. California put in this middle layer of required third party or self-distribution. We're aware of the herbal debacle, which really hurt the industry, compounded with the bespoke. There's no vendor financing for cannabis companies. So when your single vendor finance solution in LeafLink goes away and your second in bespoke kind of falls over, you had a lot of brands hurting. Herbal going away was another kind of cut. And you have this kind of dysfunctional payment cycle at retail. So if you're a brand or if you're a vertically integrated, cultivation and brand, you're not making a lot of money on your retail product. So it becomes more challenging. I do think that there are people who are being successful. I can think of two or three, vertically integrated cultivators with a brand that have been able to move 60 to 80% of their product into the bulk wholesale market legally. And they've done that at a very nice margin. I had the pleasure of touring the Peoples facility down in Orange County a week or two ago. And if you're not aware of Peoples, I believe that they have the largest vertically integrated oil grow and extraction facility, probably west of the Mississippi. So they're making plenty of money. They're moving about $2 million of disti a week at a pretty good margin out of that facility. And the scale of it is like, an industrial pharmaceutical manufacturing plant. You definitely have people in the manufacturing side that are doing okay. But I think if you're just an asset light brand or you're just operating retail, it's probably pretty hard to be successful in California. But I'm staying the course. And I think it's going to long term be, one of the better markets still.
For Peoples, maybe not without giving away the secret sauce, how do you foresee them operating with such ferocity given the constraints? Is it efficiencies, SOPs, technologies and tools, combinations of both? How are they able to kind of operate on a different level than some of the other peers who are really struggling mightily?
They were growers. They have a very visionary founder. He had a massive store in Orange County that they ended up selling. 2, 3 years ago, he decided that he was going to create a couple 100-acre farm for himself in Lenore, and he was going to take over the oil market. And he did. So he said, I'm going to go take that hill. And he took it over and he had the cash to do it. They had a bunch of farms in Salinas. They sold them. They had retail. They sold them. They put everything into this farm. And it's probably, I know for a fact it's, probably one of the largest outdoor oil extraction, grows and facilities that I've ever seen. And that's saying a lot. So, they had the capacity to do it and did it. And at the time I was like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Like, I don't know that I'm backing that, but now they're doing it and they're ripping. So
I think a lot of that has to do with, I was listening to a podcast with Jeff Bezos, and he talks about how a lot of when you have an emerging market, a lot of the infrastructure isn't there. So you can't have these like advanced companies come in and come up with these advanced solutions because there is no infrastructure, right? And so with the People's analogy, right, they came in, they built this massive facility, which then essentially will create stability within the manufacturing sector. And so do you anticipate then kind of the big companies or the big opportunity within the next 10 years as far as like being able to, as a company or an entrepreneur, come in and rely on that manufacturing infrastructure that, say, Peoples has, so that you can get ingredients to formulate your products, create a brand that you wouldn't be able to previous? Do you think that that kind of work and effort that they're putting in is going to create these opportunities for entrepreneurs in the future?
Maybe. I mean, I guess I tend to think about it like a different way, meaning that if I look at, who Wall Street investment banks, think are the biggest or the most important or the top 10 MSOs in the United States, and we just talk about Curaleaf, GTI, Trulieve, Verano, Ascend, AYR, TerraSend, Cannabis, and Cresco. I think Cresco still has some marginal operation in California, but the rest of them have nothing. So if you're, if we just, now I'm going to look at some data so I actually sound smart, but if you're, a few $billion market cap company in any of those three, and you're not in the biggest market, then what are you doing? So I kind of look at it from the perspective of if or when the walls come down, these guys have come to California, they haven't figured it out. It doesn't fit their limited license, vertically integrated model. Somebody's gonna have to move in here and either take out somebody like a Peoples or, I'm a consultant at Glass House, or I think somebody like a Glass House, because, they have the capacity to basically power flower into every state west of the Mississippi at a price cheaper than anybody could imagine. So I look at it from that perspective, as opposed to like the enablement of, more innovation. I kind of look at it more like, well, if you're this beast and you're, a couple of $1 billion valuation company and you're not playing in the biggest market, then what are you doing?
If you had to guess, do you think it's an MSO that comes in and takes out those two companies to kind of pair in as the walls come down? Or do you think it's an outside industry company who sees that as a prime opportunity to secure key assets in one of the biggest markets and then make a disruption to the industry? How do you see that working out?
I think it's both. I think it's honestly both. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see waves. So let's look at what British Tobacco has done recently. So they're probably the single biggest CPG company recently that has publicly, outside of Constellation, announced an investment into a cannabis company because they got to figure out what the hell to do. Right? They don't have a strategy and they need more customers, and every cannabis customer should be a British Tobacco customer, right? So I think you're going to see certain people in the MSO either consolidate or use their platforms as consolidators, and then I think you're going to see selected strategics come in and make acquisitions. You already know that Beverage is looking really hard. There's a guy out here in Southern California named Jason Vygotsky who has an outsourced sales agency called PedalFast, who has taken publicly money from a very large liquor distribution company and family. He's teeing up the marriage, right? You look at what's going on in D8, D9. My mentor and partner in the industry, Nick Fasano, is now the chief revenue officer at Cann. You know where they're going, right? It's pretty simple. There's going to be a vitamin water story out of somebody in Bev. More money's gone into Bev kind of irrationally for me in the last 2 quarters than I've seen go into cannabis in a while. But I think you see it both ways. I also think two other things that I think you see. I know this is going to sound really dumb, but I do think that brand becomes important at some level and SOPs become important. So 2 companies that I talk about endlessly, in Timeless and Groon Edibles, we could probably, although she's not going to want me to do this, add a company like Wild or Thunderstorm to those lists. I do think that you're going to see somebody like Mars or someone like that say, shit, you got $100 million edibles company. Like I need and it's in 14 states and you're international. Like I need that because that's basically my customer. Another company that I haven't done a profile yet, but I love, company out of California called Level Pro Tabs. I don't know if you're familiar with them. It's formulated kind of like an oral self-dissolving pill. If you take a look at it, it comes in a box. It's all kinds of rares and minors. It's indication specific. It's the coolest formulated product. It's probably the most pharmaceutically formulated product in cannabis. It's very cannabis looking, so it's like black and neon green or black and neon blue in its packaging. But you could just see if like you reskinned that and some pharma person like made that a CVS package, like that product should be on the shelf at CVS tomorrow. Sleep, Mood, Awake, 1906 is another product. It's kind of in that same, genre. So I do think you see people like pharma or wellness or cosmetic come in. I do think you see brand amalgamators come in, certain segments to take people out. And again, to be totally transparent, that's what I'm waiting for, right? I'm 53. If that doesn't happen by the time I'm 60, I'm going to be a ghost. You're not going to be able to find me. I'm going to be in Laguna doing yoga and art and making bracelets. I'm going to be done. But between now and 2030, I think Armageddon and reckoning and this inflection is coming. And the thing is, I'm not trying to be arrogant. I'm not trying to have an ego, but I'm telling you, I see it and I know it's going to happen. I can't tell you when it's going to happen, but man, when it happens, there is going to be a flood of money and deals and irrationality. And I'm going to be right dead center in the fucking middle of it.
I love it. And I wonder, though, how quickly that happens, because as you were saying, there's certain brands that might be more advantageous for these partners to come and gobble them up as fast as possible, because there could be, quote unquote, a bidding war, because you're right. There's only few companies that kind of meet the criteria like you're talking about, which makes it more enticing for these partners to come in and say, hey, we can gobble up a Gruen or a Kiva right away, or we have to gobble up a few smaller brands to meet that same set of criteria, which could then mean a faster flurry and just people spending in anticipation of the moves.
I think you're going to see, again, waves that are going to be 18 to 24-month waves. You might remember, if you're kind of deep in the sector, in 2020, there was like 11 SPACs that were all like these giant battleships that were trying to put everything into them, and like 6 of them actually happened or something. I think you're going to kind of see the same thing. Like the day that lawyers for Procter and Gamble say, okay, you're clear, right? They're probably going to have like 8 things teed up, because the announcement is probably going to come so far before the actual legislation. And then I think you're going to see a second kind of wave. So I think it's going to be a process over like 24 to 36 months. But once the flag actually drops, it's going to be game on, right? It's going to be game on. And for the smart people, or the people who are thinking that way, you're already having those discussions. I'm already having those discussions. And I'm not shy about it. Again, I don't really go to the bathroom without a strategy. So I have a strategy, right? So I'm already knocking on the door and saying, hey, you need to talk to me. Hey, you need to talk to me. So,
I mean, a lot of this conversation has been about companies coming in, big companies buying things. But if you remove all of these obstacles and kind of take the handcuffs off some of these companies that are performing with in the face of all this adversity, do you think that there could be a chance for one of these companies to actually expand outside of cannabis and then, become one of these massive behemoths, just with their sophisticated team and the fact that they have a cash flow business right now in the face of paying these massive taxes and all these regulatory obstacles, right? You remove all of those challenges with a super sophisticated team and a high cash flow business. Do you think that there's an opportunity for them to just kind of become a massive behemoth like a Procter and Gamble, essentially?
there could be. I don't know that anyone has the capacity to think that big, just because you've had the constraints put on them for so long.
Yeah.
I think the general religious indoctrination in the industry is we're going to build to sell. That's a very interesting strategy, though, and one I haven't heard before, and could be underwritten. I think the first lever that you're going to find to move in a direction is if or when 280E goes away. And if you think cannabis, and let's just say, is a $30 billion, $35 billion legal market, when 280E goes away, there's going to be another $3.5 billion that people are now paying in taxes that are going to stay in the industry. So I think the first unlock is that when the companies that are paying taxes and giving the government cash don't have to do that anymore, it's going to get kind of interesting, because it's going to make the people that are strong stronger. It's going to make the people that are on life support stick around, and probably stick around too long. But I do think you're going to have 3 or 4 people that are like, oh, well, what can I do with this now? And that's going to be your first, and I hate to use this word because some guy said it 18 times on the phone the other day. That's going to be your first real unlock, right? And when that comes through, it'll be interesting. Where I do, Kellen, think you're going to see something, and you almost saw it, was, Cannabis and Cresco tried to merge, right? And that unwound. I do think you're going to see a big into big at some point. I don't know which one that is. I also think that, honestly, that when you look at what I call the big 3 and maybe the big 4 in, Curaleaf, GTI, Trulieve, and Verano, you have beasts there. You have, an aggregate market capitalization across those 4 companies, which is about $2.9 billion. Those are real companies, right? So if they decide they want to do something, they would, they could. One of the things that I don't understand why they're not doing it at those 4 companies, and it's conversations that I have with their teams often, is that it's a good thing that I don't run, strategy or biz dev at one of those companies, because I would be buying everything that is profitable now with my paper at a discount and just throwing darts on the wall and amassing cash flow that was accretive. And none of those guys seem to want to do that. I think I know why, but
Why do you think?
micro cap stocks don't perform like big market stocks. So I think no matter what they do, they don't think they're going to get the realization of the valuation appreciation. But it doesn't matter, right? The first thing that, I picked up in business school was paper is not cash. Dilution is not cash. So if you can go buy something with paper, go buy as many things with paper as you possibly can for as long as you can and make it accretive and buy cash with paper. It's going to work out in the long run. So why? I think that's why.
Yeah, we're in agreement there. I definitely think that's the same approach, but it would be interesting if one of these executives took a completely different approach and said, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to gobble up all these assets that are cash flow positive. I'm going to be primed for when the walls do come down and let's say 280 does get removed. It's game time and everyone else will be chasing me then.
It's a good thing I'm not in the con in one of those guys, because I would literally have a deal team of like 6 SEAL team killers. And I would just be like, here's what we're looking for, and call every single friggin' operator in every single state and put term sheets out, and let's go buy 10 things. Let's go buy $100 million of cash flow now. Get it.
That'd be some
I
headlines.
mean, cash flow is king, though, right? Like that's the most important thing in this industry above anything else. It's the only way that anyone pays their bills, expands, growth. All of that is directly tied to cash flow. So
all of the companies, with very few exception, that I talk about generate net operating income. Most of them generate net operating income after interest and taxes, right? Every single one of the ones, almost 90% of the ones that I highlight. So the theme for me is pretty consistent. Just figure out a way to make money. As long as if we have decisions and this one makes money and this one doesn't make money, let's do the one that makes money.
That's a good business strategy.
Kellen, I wonder if it's the integration of those assets together is like the biggest headache that companies are like, that'd be too hard to put them together because maybe they're thinking 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3 immediately.
And I think there's also like a shell shock feature too, right? Like this hasn't worked out perfectly as it's been described in the past, right? There's been a lot of issues. So it could be like a balancing risk reward and like you're shell shocked. And like, it's been a long journey for a lot of these companies, right?
It has, it has, but you know what, B, you bring up a great issue, which is integration, right? Like prior to Cannabis, I would consider myself a pretty knowledgeable professional M&A person. 40% of the M&As that I've ever seen fail because the integration is just a disaster for whatever reason. So one of the things that I tell people about M&A is that buying it is a skill. Successfully integrating it is really the skill, because how many stories have you heard? Oh, my Uncle Joe sold his company to Kraft and they ran it into the ground and they didn't know what to do and they didn't know how to treat people and they stepped over, quarters to get nickels, right? And you hear that a lot of times about strategics, and you hear it a lot about private equity acquisitions, that they just care about the dollar and not the person. The ones that are the most successful seem to kind of figure out how to do it right. But that's a skill. And I do think that they're, especially in cannabis, can't tell you that I've seen anybody who is an expert integrator yet, because usually you have to cleave off so many dying limbs that it becomes problematic. I do know that, Mammoth recently announced a transaction with Papa's, and I'm interested. I love Mammoth and I loved Papa's, and I looked at that transaction, and for the people that I looked at it for, we decided not to do anything with Papa's. But I think for someone like Mammoth, who has, gobbled now 1 or 2 things, I think that will be a testament to their ability to continue to do that, which is how are they going to manage the integration of it. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. So I've been keeping my eye on that one.
Do you think integration is more tied to kind of like the personality of the leadership team, or do you think it's a more broad kind of cultural aspect associated with the company?
It's a cultural ethos. And usually what it is, I don't want to talk about politics, but if one person is a Republican and one person is a Democrat, right? you're probably not going to agree on a portion. Fair?
That's fair.
So it's kind of like the same thing in an integration, which is that, if let's just say, and just to give you an example, let's just say you have a $100 million a year revenue, $10 million EBITDA business, that makes, pencil erasers, and it's been owned by one guy his whole life. And if he would have fired half the people and put in robots and got rid of the janitor who was there for 35 years and put his kids through college, it'd probably be an $18 million a year EBITDA business. What's a financial investor going to do the first minute that they walk in and they realize that? They're going to turn it into an $18 million EBITDA business, right? So it's kind of less about the success of it, and sometimes it's more about the culturalization of it. I've seen a lot of companies come in, and because they don't understand the value of the customer that they're buying, mess up a business. I've seen a lot of people come in, and because they don't understand the relationships that the company that they're buying have with their customers, it messes up the business. I've just seen people who culturally believe, we're going to get sales at all costs versus we're going to make every sale profitable. That can kill an integration. So it just depends. Usually what I find, unless it's a very rare exception, usually the buyer's cultural ethos is going to dominate that conversation, especially if the buyer is bigger than the seller.
I would say, and we're in a complete agreement, Seth. I would agree with you and say that the finding of those 6 SEAL team people to identify those businesses likely are the easiest part, exactly like you laid out, because the integration aspect doesn't just happen day one. It is a continual, ongoing process, and you need strong leadership in order to deploy those principles and keep the culture together.
It's also about the alignment of incentives, right? So remember, if you're the owner of a business and you're building it to grow and you have relationships with your employees and customers, the alignment of your incentives is to your employees and customers. If a buyer comes in and buys your business, they don't give a shit about your employees and customers. They give a shit about money. And I'm going to tell you why. Because let's think about it. In the $100 million revenue, $10 million EBITDA business, if we now turn that into $100 million revenue, $18 million EBITDA business, let's say the private equity guy is going to use leverage to buy the business. Well, at 10 times EBITDA, 3 times 10 is 30. At 18 times EBITDA, or at 18 million in EBITDA, 3 times 18 is 54. So if you think about the alignment of incentives, if we're partners in a private equity fund and we say, we fire the janitor, we get rid of the college fund, you put in robots, and the bank will give us 28 million more bucks to buy the company, and we don't have to come up with it from our fund, what are you going to do? Your incentives don't align. So sometimes it has less to do with, oh, the private equity guys are assholes, which they usually are. It has more to do with the fact that, oh, if I'm an investor and I have to use less of my capital to get more return because I can leverage it, it just comes down to business. Well, no, it just comes down to business, right? You hear that, oh, well, it's not personal, it's just business. There, it just comes down to, I want to make more money, is what it comes down to. So, I've been seeing a lot of things where, oh, it's just business. Business sometimes is greed, right? So if your incentive alignment is, I have to make that return, you're going to make decisions that don't feel good. One of the most important things I ever told a CEO is that as a CEO, it's really hard to do the right thing as a human being a lot of the time. Because if we look at that quantitative example, we're all going to come to the same conclusion from a dollars and cents perspective. If you are the single entrepreneur who founded the company in this example, and you've had people that you've put their kids through college and they come and they take, it's a different, the emotional alignment of the incentives is different. And I've seen it all. It's very rare at this point that I'm surprised by anything.
Let's quickly switch gears to a prediction. Seth, as the cannabis industry transitions towards a more mainstream market structure, What key elements do you envision as crucial for companies aiming to establish enduring, resilient business models?
I think stay in your lane. I think what was pervasive at the beginning was we're going to try and do everything. And I'm not sure that's worked. I think if you're good at what you do, stay in your lane. I think the other thing that I've seen and I still see in cannabis, and it kind of annoys me, is build what you're building to your actual demand. Don't build what you're building to your projected demand. Because it seems in cannabis that, and we've all smiling, we've all seen these facilities where, you go to a place like New Jersey and you're like, bro, like not for nothing, but in Ventura, California, there's the second largest contiguous greenhouse facility in North America. You don't need a greenhouse in New Jersey. Like, no disrespect. You just don't. You don't need it. So, and don't tell me that you're going to supply the whole state of New Jersey with your greenhouse when you've never grown weed in it before. And you've never grown weed. So things like that, I'm just like, okay. So I think, stay in your lane and build what you're building to expected demand. The companies that we've talked about in this hour are the ones that have owned and dominated a market and then said, I want to apply those teachings and those principles to going into another market. So the capital or the expansion that I want is growth capital. Can I go in there, deploy the same model, get share, and scale based upon that profitably? So I think those kind of 3 or 4 simple things is where I would kind of tell people to focus.
Love it. Kellen.
I kind of on the same page. I would say that systematic improvement, systematic efficiency focuses, right? Like Coca-Cola's recipe is not what Coca-Cola started the company with, right? 100 years ago. So systematic improvements are going to lead to systematic and small market share gains, right? And if you look at Kiva or Gruen, which we talked about earlier on the show, Gruen didn't just start in a bunch of different states. It was started in a kitchen and systematically improved it, got the formulation right, made it a profitable company, used revenue from being profitable from the systematic improvements to then expand. So I think that focusing on efficiency and systematic improvements just helps you stay in that lane that you're good at even more. And then it makes you even more valuable when, the unlocking actually does occur. Brian, what do you think?
I think have an understanding of your numbers and your principles for your COGS, especially if you're a producer, and understanding what it costs to produce a product is so critical, and having that number accurate. Because if there are opportunities where there are tools that come into the market, like we all expect, that are used in other industries, like mainstream in agriculture or in processing, to alleviate some of these unknowns and improve on efficiencies immediately, they're not cheap, but their improvements from a bottom line perspective are pretty much instantaneous. And adapting those technologies involves having the cash position to put those resources in play to allow your business to grow and to scale to a different level.
I think the other thing that I've seen, and I'm going to bring up 2 companies we've talked about and 2 more because they all have the same thing. They're obsessive about the quality of their product and brand. So if you look at Timeless, if you look at Gruen, 2 companies we haven't talked about in Pure Beauty and in a Golden State. Okay. So those are 4 companies I talk to the founders and the CEOs and the management of all the time. Okay. And they all kind of have the same story. Iconic brandography. If you see the brand and you're in the industry, you know immediately who it is and what they do. It's the kind of brand that potentially, because it's iconic in its iconography or because it's unique in its iconography, you could see in CPG. And the founders and the teams in all 4 of those companies are fucking maniacally obsessed about their brand ethos and about the quality of their product. Okay. Rocky and Josh at Timeless are not going to do a brand collab and put out a product that they don't think is going to rip, right? Is going to rip. Christine at Gruen is not going to put out a product that she hasn't formulated, tasted, tested, meets her standard. Right. Nishant at Golden State is maniacal. He is mental, obsessive, like borderline obsessive about the way his brand looks, about the colors that is look, about the website. They put together and opened a dispensary in Reading. It's the most beautiful friggin' store I've ever seen in my entire life. and it's consistent with the entire iconography of the brand, right? If you see Pure Beauty, you know exactly what it is, you know exactly what to expect. And because she's really kind of advanced into a little bit of trendy crossover CPG, she's become associated with the dog walker, right? So most people that I know, if I go to another state, don't even know about Pure Beauty or what she's doing. They're like, oh, you mean that really cool dog walker that you brought around, right? So like the other thing that I see in the ones that are really, you know, and again, Level Pro Tab, same way, they're obsessively maniacal and focused about, I want that customer experience with my product to be the same every time, and I want it to be awesome. I don't want it to be good. I don't want it to be great. I don't want it to be okay. I want them to love what I make, and I want them to come back and ask for it again, so much so that they're not going to switch. And the things that I see in you know those companies, specifically on the brand side, is that they're, you know, obsessive about it. Look, Graham at Glass House, man, he is in that facility every single day, right? Every single solitary day. It's an enormous facility, so you better be in there every day. But he's checking on everything that's going on there every single day, right? So, you know, you got to be. Cannabis is unlike any other industry that I've been in. It's almost like you're on call in the military. I can't tell you how many calls I get from people 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Dude, you need to help me. Dude, I have an emergency. Dude, what's going on? Right. So it's also that obsessiveness, I think, that delineates, you know, the good from the great. Again, another one, Mammoth, right? They are maniacal about the quality of that vape. They are also maniacal about counterfeiting, right? So obsessive brand iconography, obsessive brand quality metrics, obsessive about no one's going to bite this and black market it and defame or belittle the user, defame the brand and diminish the user experience. So all of those guys are all kind of lasered in on what they need to do, and that is one thing that I do think, going back to another one of your questions, for me separates okay from good, good from great, and great from excellent.
I love it. Seth, for our listeners, they want to get in touch, they want to learn more about some of your writings, where can they find you?
Allegedly, I'm on LinkedIn.
That's
if
confirmed.
You hadn't heard about that. So you can hit me on LinkedIn. I have a website which is called Kate and Associates. I think if you drill into my contact info on LinkedIn, you can email me, you can DM me. I respond to everybody. You might not like what you hear. Full disclaimer, I do not waste time and I do not mince words. If I don't know you and I don't think you have anything, I'm going to be pretty blunt about that if I can't help you. I speak a lot. I'm going to be, shameless plug, at the Benzinga conference in Florida in April. I will be on stage and I will be in South Florida for a few days. Would love to connect with you, but just hit me on LinkedIn or on the website and I will usually respond.
Awesome. We'll link it up in the show notes. Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You woke me. You awoke the Kraken today, and now I'm like ready to go for like 2 more hours. I'm like, I need a bio break, and I'm ready to do the second hour of the show. Let's go.
I love it.